On my last video, I told you about the written, signed agreement that Kwankwaso confirmed on live television, one term for Peter Obi, then power returns north for Kwankwaso in 2031. If you have not watched that one yet, go back and watch it because today's video is the direct continuation of that story and it exposes something the deal itself cannot fix. Here's the problem nobody in the NNDC's own campaign wants to say out loud. The region that ticket needs most is the region that trusts it least. Political stakeholders across northern Nigeria have told journalists on record that the majority of northerners have not embraced the NNDC. Some northern leaders have started actively warning their own followers against the party. In political materials circulating across WhatsApp groups in the region, Obi and Kwankwaso have been described using a word that carries enormous weight in Nigerian religious and political culture: haram, forbidden. It gets worse. In Ungogo local government area of Kano State, Kwankwaso's own home turf, the place where he recorded his most impressive performance in the 2023 election, angry youths burnt Obi and Kwankwaso's campaign posters. A member of the Kano State House of Assembly who had defected to the NNDC from the APC has already returned to the APC. And here's the detail that should genuinely worry the NNDC campaign the most. The National Publicity Secretary of the Arewa Consultative Forum, one of the most established northern political bodies in Nigeria, says there is even doubt about whether Kwankwaso can still hold Kano itself. Today, we are going to walk through exactly why this resistance exists, whether the NNDC's response to it is working, and what it means for the succession deal Kwankwaso confirmed on live television. Stay with me. If you are new to the Policy Pulse HQ, this channel connects the dots other channels rush past. Subscribe now. Watch the full breakdown here on this channel. This short only gave you half the story. And stay with me because understanding why the North is resisting this ticket tells you whether that signed 2031 deal is even worth the paper it is written on. Every documented sign of Northern pushback. Let us go through exactly what has been documented, because this is not one journalist's impression, it is a pattern confirmed across multiple independent sources and multiple separate incidents. Obi and Kwankwaso formally joined the NDC in May 2026 after both men left the African Democratic Congress. The party subsequently confirmed Obi as its presidential candidate and Kwankwaso as his running mate, with the top office zoned to the south and the vice presidency zoned to the north, exactly the arrangement we broke down in detail in our previous video. Almost immediately, resistance began surfacing in specific documented incidents. Political material describing Obi and Kwankwaso as haram circulated across WhatsApp platforms in the north. In Ungogo local government area of Kano State specifically, youths burned campaign posters belonging to the ticket. A Kano State House of Assembly member named Mohammed Thomas, who had defected to the NDC from the APC, reversed course and returned to the APC entirely. The Arewa Consultative Forum, through its National Publicity Secretary, Professor Tokur Mohammed Baba, gave one of the most consequential assessments. He said the NDC had yet to gain significant visibility and acceptance among northern voters, and that the party remained, in his words, largely unknown to ordinary voters across the region. That is a striking statement about a presidential ticket that includes Rabiu Kwankwaso, a man who was a serious presidential contender in 2023 and remains one of the North's most recognizable political figures. But Professor Mohammed Baba went further, and this is the detail that should genuinely concern the NDC campaign. He specifically questioned whether Kwankwaso can hold on to Kano State, the exact state where he recorded his most impressive performance in the last election. He said, quote, "Apart from Kano, his influence in many parts of the north remains uncertain," end quote. This assessment is not coming from a rival political camp with an obvious motive to talk down the NDC's chances. The Arewa Consultative Forum positions itself as a broad northern advocacy body, not a partisan APC or ADC mouthpiece. When a body like that questions whether Kwankwaso can hold his own home state, that carries a different weight than the same statement coming from an opposing campaign. Not every signal is entirely negative. Some NDC officials in states like Borno and Jigawa claim they are recording growing support, attributing it specifically to widespread dissatisfaction with the current economic situation and believing that youth frustration could still create real grassroots momentum despite the visible resistance in other parts of the region.
The historical wound northern politicians keep referencing. To understand why this resistance is happening, and why it is proving so difficult for the NNNPP to overcome with campaign messaging alone, we need to go back to something that happened in 2010 and understand why northern politicians keep bringing it up in relation to Obi's promises today. Obi has repeatedly promised, publicly and specifically, that he would serve only a single 4-year term if elected in 2027, describing it as a stabilizing arrangement designed to reassure northern political interests and preserve the country's rotational balance. He has said he would honor this even, in his own words, at gunpoint. But northern political stakeholders interviewed on this exact question consistently raised the same historical reference point, the death of President Umaru Musa Yar'Adua in 2010 and the subsequent decision by his Vice President Goodluck Jonathan to contest for a full term of his own in 2011, rather than stepping aside for a northern successor as many had expected under the same rotational logic Obi is now invoking. Why written promises have not solved the trust problem. Here is where this connects directly to what we uncovered in our previous video. Kwankwaso specifically emphasized that he and Obi moved from a verbal understanding to a signed written document precisely because they recognized that trust alone might not be sufficient. And yet, despite that written agreement now being publicly confirmed, northern political stakeholders are still describing the one-term promise as, in their words, politically strategic but lacking enforceable guarantees. That is a genuinely important detail. The written document Kwankwaso confirmed exists specifically to address this trust deficit, and it is still not resolving it, at least not yet among the audience it was most designed to reassure. That tells you something important about the depth of this particular historical wound. It is not simply that northern voters have not heard the promise, many clearly have. It is that the specific mechanism chosen to make that promise credible, a private written agreement between two politicians, is not, on its own, sufficient to overcome a trust deficit rooted in a betrayal northern political memory has held on to for 16 years. If Kwankwaso cannot hold Kano, what exactly does he bring to this ticket? Let us sit with the single most consequential detail in this entire story: the direct, public questioning of whether Kwankwaso can still hold Kano State itself. To understand why this matters so much, you need to understand exactly what Kwankwaso was supposed to contribute to this ticket in the first place. In the 2023 election, running under the NNPP, Kwankwaso's strongest and most decisive performance came specifically in Kano State, his home base, where decades of political organization, patronage networks, and personal loyalty had built him a formidable electoral machine. When Obi and Kwankwaso came together for 2027, the entire logic of the pairing rested on combining Obi's southern and youth-driven obedient support with Kwankwaso's specifically northern and specifically Kano-centered delivery capacity. If that Kano-centered delivery capacity is now genuinely in doubt, and it is worth being precise that this doubt is coming from a respected northern advocacy body rather than simply partisan attacks, the entire strategic rationale for the Obi-Kwankwaso pairing weakens considerably. A vice presidential candidate chosen specifically to deliver a region he can no longer confidently deliver is not simply an underperforming asset. He becomes a genuine liability,
because voters and other northern political figures begin asking exactly the question the Arewa Consultative Forum has now asked publicly. What is Kwankwaso's actual value to this ticket, if even his own base is uncertain? The generational credibility problem beneath the surface. Here is a deeper layer to this story that deserves honest examination. NNDC chieftain Buba Galadima, speaking candidly to PM News just 1 week before this video, made a striking admission. When discussing the campaign's struggle to sell Peter Obi in the north, he acknowledged that politicians of his own generation, including implicitly himself and figures like Kwankwaso, contributed to the ethnic and religious divisions now confronting the country. He said, quote, "Of course, we did create this problem. We were part of it." End quote. That is a genuinely unusual admission for a senior political figure to make publicly about his own generation's role in the very divisions his current campaign is struggling against. It suggests that at least some figures inside the NNDC campaign itself understand that this resistance is not simply a messaging problem that better campaign communication can fix. It is, at least in part, a credibility problem rooted in the actual political history of the very men now asking northern voters to trust a new arrangement. Galadima also used the interview to accuse the APC administration of neglecting agriculture and pursuing food importation policies he claimed harmed local farmers, though he did not present supporting figures during that specific exchange, and outlined plans for the ticket to invest in agriculture, local manufacturing, and practical skills training to address unemployment should they win. Whether that specific economic pitch, rather than the succession arrangement alone, becomes the campaign's more effective tool for building northern trust is something worth watching closely in the months ahead. Drop a comment right now and tell me honestly, do you think the NNDC can still turn this northern resistance around before January 2027? Or has the Yaradua precedent made that trust gap too wide to close? I want your honest view.
Being fair to the other side of this story. Analytical honesty requires us to examine the strongest reasonable case that the NDC's northern challenges, real as they are, do not necessarily doom the ticket, because several genuine counterpoints deserve consideration. First, the North is not a single unified political bloc that moves as one. It is expected to play a decisive role in the 2027 election precisely because it accounts for a substantial share of Nigeria's voting population, and that population spans multiple states, ethnic groups, and political traditions with genuinely different priorities and loyalties. Resistance documented specifically in Kano and specifically among established political bodies like the Arewa Consultative Forum does not automatically translate into uniform resistance across states like Borno, Jigawa, or the wider Middle Belt, where some NDC officials report genuinely growing grassroots support. Second, economic dissatisfaction is a genuinely powerful political force that can override historical grievances and organizational weaknesses under the right conditions. If the widespread hardship northern Nigerians are currently experiencing continues or worsens between now and January 2027, that dissatisfaction could plausibly generate exactly the kind of grassroots momentum some NDC officials are already claiming to see, particularly among younger voters who may feel less directly connected to the 2010 to 2011 political history that older northern political stakeholders keep referencing. Third, 7 months remains a meaningful window in Nigerian political timescales. The specific incidents documented so far, poster burnings, one legislator's defection reversal, WhatsApp messaging campaigns, represent real and documented resistance, but they are early signals from a campaign still in its opening phase, not a final verdict on how northern voters will actually behave when they reach the ballot box in January 2027.
4 signals for the months ahead. Here is exactly what to watch as this story develops between now and January 2027. The first signal is whether the NDC campaign shifts its northern messaging strategy away from relying primarily on the succession promise and the written agreement toward the kind of concrete economic pitch Galadima outlined: agriculture investment, local manufacturing, and skills training. If that shift happens visibly and gains traction, it would suggest the campaign has correctly diagnosed that trust in a political promise cannot substitute for a credible economic argument. The second signal is whether any credible independent polling emerges, specifically measuring Kwankwaso's actual standing in Kano State, rather than relying on his 2023 performance as an assumed baseline. Given that the Arewa Consultative Forum has now publicly questioned this specific point, verified polling data would move this conversation from informed speculation to measurable fact. The third signal is whether more northern political figures follow the pattern set by Mohammed Thomas, defecting to the NDC and then reversing course back to established parties. A single reversal is a data point. A pattern of similar reversals would represent a much more serious organizational problem for the ticket. The fourth signal, and the one that connects most directly to our previous video, is whether the succession arrangement itself becomes a more prominent or a less prominent part of the NDC's northern campaign messaging going forward. If northern resistance continues, whether the campaign leans harder into publicizing the written 2031 guarantee to reassure skeptical voters, or whether it quietly de-emphasizes that specific promise in favor of other messaging, given that it does not yet appear to be resolving the trust deficit it was designed to address.
Here is where this story leaves us. The Obi Kwankwaso ticket enters the heart of its 2027 campaign, facing genuine, documented, and multi-source confirmed resistance across significant parts of northern Nigeria, including specific doubt about whether Kwankwaso can even hold his own home state of Kano. The written succession agreement we broke down in our last video was designed specifically to address exactly this kind of northern trust deficit. As of today, it does not appear to be fully succeeding at that task, at least not yet, according to the very northern political bodies it was meant to reassure. Whether the NDC campaign can close this trust gap through economic messaging, sustained grassroots organization, or simple time before Nigerians actually vote in January 2027 is one of the defining open questions of this entire election cycle, and it is a question this ticket cannot afford to leave unanswered. If this analysis connected the dots between the signed succession deal and the northern resistance it was meant to solve, share it with one Nigerian who needs to see it before 2027. Like this video, subscribe to the ThePolicyPulseHQ, and tell me in the comments, can the NDC still win the North, or is this trust gap too wide? I will see you in the next one.